I knew something was wrong the moment I saw Patricia Garrison standing in my driveway at 7 in the morning, clutching a clipboard like it was a legal weapon, and wearing an expression that could curdle milk. My name is Zachary Langford, and I had been living in the Meadowbrook Estates subdivision in Boulder, Colorado, for exactly 8 months. The house was perfect, a charming 3-bedroom ranch with a backyard that looked out onto the foothills. The neighborhood seemed quiet, peaceful even. What I did not realize when I signed those closing papers was that Patricia Garrison, the HOA president, treated the subdivision's covenants like they were constitutional amendments, and she enforced them with the dedication of a prison warden. I opened my front door, still holding my coffee mug, and stepped out onto the porch. The February air bit at my face, reminding me why I had moved from California in the first place. I loved the cold, the snow, the mountains. Patricia, however, did not look like she was there to discuss the weather. "Mr. Langford," she said, her voice sharp enough to cut glass, "we need to discuss a serious violation." I took a sip of my coffee, trying to wake up enough for whatever nonsense was about to unfold. "Good morning to you too, Patricia. What violation?" She pointed an accusatory finger toward the side of my property, where the fence line met a small patch of evergreen trees. "That yellow snow. It is disgusting, unsightly, and completely unacceptable in a community of our standards." I blinked, wondering if I had heard her correctly. "Yellow snow." "Yes," she said, flipping through papers on her clipboard. "Section 12. Paragraph 4 of our HOA covenants clearly states that all property must be maintained in a clean and aesthetically pleasing manner. Yellow snow is neither clean nor aesthetically pleasing." I set my coffee mug down on the porch railing and walked down the steps, my breath creating small clouds in the frigid morning air. Patricia followed me, her heels clicking on the concrete driveway with an irritating rhythm that matched her personality. When we reached the fence line, I could indeed see patches of yellow snow near the trees. "Patricia," I said slowly, "that is from animals, probably deer or coyotes. They come through here at night." She crossed her arms over her chest, her lips pressed into a thin line. "I do not care what caused it. It is your responsibility to maintain your property. I am issuing you a formal citation and a fine of $250. You have 72 hours to remediate the situation." I stared at her, trying to determine if she was serious or if this was some kind of elaborate prank. Her expression suggested she was deadly serious. "You are fining me for animal urine. I am fining you for failing to maintain your property according to HOA standards." She pulled a pre-printed citation form from her clipboard and held it out to me. "Sign here to acknowledge receipt." I did not take the paper. "I am not signing anything. This is completely ridiculous." Patricia's face flushed red, a color that clashed terribly with her platinum blonde hair. "Mr. Langford, if you refuse to sign, I will be forced to escalate this matter to the HOA board. That could result in additional fines and even legal action." "Legal action over yellow snow," I said flatly. "Do you hear yourself?" "I hear a homeowner who thinks he is above the rules that everyone else follows." She shoved the citation into my hand. 72 hours, Mr. Langford. Clean it up or face the consequences." She turned on her heel and marched back to her car, a pristine white Lexus SUV that probably cost more than my entire year's salary. I watched her drive away, then looked down at the citation in my hand. The fine was indeed $250, with threats of additional penalties if I did not comply. I walked back inside, my good mood thoroughly ruined. My dog, a golden retriever named Murphy, trotted over to greet me, his tail wagging enthusiastically. I scratched behind his ears and pulled out my phone. If Patricia wanted to play games, I could play games too. But first, I needed to understand exactly what I was dealing with. The Meadowbrook Estates HOA covenants were available online, a thick document filled with rules about everything from fence heights to approved paint colors. I spent the next hour reading through the entire thing, making notes and highlighting relevant sections. Section 12. Paragraph 4 did indeed mention maintaining property in a clean and aesthetically pleasing manner, but it was vague enough to be interpreted a dozen different ways. Nowhere did it specifically mention snow, yellow or otherwise. What I did find interesting was Section 3, Paragraph 7, which defined property boundaries and responsibilities. According to the covenants, homeowners were only responsible for maintaining areas within their surveyed property lines. Anything outside those lines, including easements and common areas, fell under HOA responsibility. I grabbed my property survey from the filing cabinet in my home office. When I bought the house, the title company had provided detailed survey maps showing exactly where my property lines were. I spread the documents out on my kitchen table and studied them carefully. The area where the yellow snow had appeared was close to my fence, but I needed to verify exactly where the property line was. I spent the rest of the morning bundling up in winter gear and trudging through the snow with a measuring tape and the survey map. The metal survey stakes were buried under the snow, but I eventually found them using a metal detector I had bought for a different project. After careful measuring and cross-referencing with the map, I confirmed what I suspected. The yellow snow was not actually on my property. It was about 3 feet beyond my property line, in what the survey designated as a common area maintained by the HOA. I took dozens of photographs, documenting everything. I photographed the survey stakes, the yellow snow, the measurements, and the surrounding area from multiple angles. I even used my phone's GPS to record the exact coordinates. If Patricia wanted evidence, I would give her more evidence than she knew what to do with. That evening, I drafted a formal response to the citation. I explained that the area in question was not within my property boundaries, and included copies of the survey map, with the relevant sections highlighted. I cited Section 3, Paragraph 7 of the HOA covenants, and politely suggested that the HOA address the issue themselves since it was in a common area. I ended the letter by requesting that the fine be immediately withdrawn and that I receive a written apology for the false accusation. I sent the letter via certified mail and email to both Patricia and the HOA board. Then I waited. 3 days passed without any response. On the 4th day, I received another letter from the HOA. This one was not from Patricia, but from the HOA's property management company, a firm called Summit Property Solutions. The letter informed me that my appeal had been reviewed and denied. The fine was now increased to $500 due to my failure to remediate within the specified time frame. I had 7 days to pay or face a lien on my property. I sat at my kitchen table, reading the letter 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. They had not addressed any of the evidence I provided. They had not acknowledged the survey maps or the property line issue. They had simply doubled down and increased the fine. I called Summit Property Solutions immediately. After navigating an automated phone system that seemed designed to frustrate callers, I finally reached a human being named Carol. "This is regarding the citation issued to my property at 42 Meadow Lane," I said. "I submitted evidence proving that the area in question is not on my property, but I just received a letter increasing the fine." Carol put me on hold for several minutes. When she returned, her voice had the tired quality of someone who dealt with angry homeowners all day. Yes, Mr. Langford. I am looking at your file now. The HOA board reviewed your submission and determined that regardless of the exact property line, you are still responsible for maintaining the area adjacent to your property. That is not what the covenants say, I replied, trying to keep my voice calm. I cited the specific section. Common areas are HOA responsibility. The board has the authority to interpret the covenants as they see fit, Carol said. If you disagree with their decision, you can attend the next board meeting and make your case in person. When is the next board meeting? Let me check. More typing sounds. The next meeting is scheduled for March 15th. That is 3 weeks away, I said. The letter says I have 7 days to pay the fine. Yes, that is correct. So I am supposed to pay a $500 fine for something that is not my responsibility, and then hope the board decides to refund me at some point in the future, Carol sighed. Mr. Langford, I understand your frustration, but I am just relaying the board's decision. If you do not pay within 7 days, they will proceed with placing a lien on your property. That will negatively impact your credit and could complicate any future refinancing or sale. I thanked Carol for her time and hung up, my hands shaking with anger. This was not about yellow snow or property maintenance. This was about power and control. Patricia had decided to target me for some reason, and she was using the HOA as her weapon. I needed help, and I needed it from someone who understood HOA law. I spent the evening researching real estate attorneys in Boulder. Most of them specialized in buying and selling properties, but I eventually found a lawyer named David Chen who had experience with HOA disputes. His website featured several case studies where he had successfully defended homeowners against overreaching HOAs. I called his office first thing the next morning and explained the situation. David listened without interrupting, occasionally asking clarifying questions. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. "You have the survey maps and photographs?" he asked. "Yes, everything is documented." "Good. This is actually more straightforward than most HOA cases I handle. If the area is genuinely outside your property line, they have no legal standing to fine you for it. The problem is that HOAs often count on homeowners not fighting back because the legal costs exceed the fine amount. So, what do you recommend? We can send them a formal legal demand letter explaining that they are in violation of their own covenants and threatening legal action if they do not withdraw the fine. That sometimes works. If it does not, we can file in small claims court. Given the clear documentation you have, I am confident we would win. What would that cost me? My retainer for HOA disputes is $1,500. That covers the demand letter and initial court filings if necessary. If this goes to trial, we would discuss additional costs, but honestly, I doubt it will get that far. Most HOAs back down when they realize a homeowner has legal representation. $1,500 to fight a $500 fine seemed insane, but the principle mattered more than the money at this point. If I let Patricia bully me over this, she would just find something else to harass me about. I agreed to David's terms and sent him all the documentation. 2 days later, David sent a formal demand letter to the HOA board, Patricia Garrison, and Summit Property Solutions. The letter was beautifully written, citing specific Colorado HOA laws and clearly explaining why the fine was invalid. It demanded that the fine be withdrawn within 5 business days, and that the HOA provide a written acknowledgement that the area in question was a common space, not my responsibility. It also warned that if they proceeded with the lien, we would file suit for harassment and seek to recover legal fees and damages. I expected some kind of response, perhaps a phone call or another letter. What I got instead was silence. The 5 business days passed with no word from the HOA. Then, on the 6th day, I received a certified letter from Summit Property Solutions informing me that a lien had been placed on my property for non-payment of fines totaling $500 plus administrative fees of $150. I forwarded the letter to David immediately. He called me back within an hour, and I could hear the frustration in his voice. "This is incredibly stupid on their part," he said. "They have just opened themselves up to significant liability. I am going to file in small claims court today. We are going to request that the lien be removed, that all fines be withdrawn, and that they pay your legal fees. We might also go for additional damages for harassment. How long will this take? Small claims in Boulder County usually get scheduled within a month or 2. In the meantime, make sure you document everything. If Patricia or anyone from the HOA contacts you, keep records of what they say. If they do anything else to harass you, let me know immediately." Over the next 3 weeks, things escalated in ways I never could have imagined. Patricia started driving by my house multiple times a day, slowing down to stare at my property like she was searching for additional violations. She sent me 2 more citations, one for having my trash cans visible from the street on a non-collection day, even though it was collection day, and another for having an unapproved doormat. The doormat was a simple brown mat that said "Welcome," exactly like half a dozen other doormats in the neighborhood. I forwarded each citation to David, who added them to our growing case file. He seemed almost gleeful about it. "She is building our case for us," he said during one of our phone calls. "Every frivolous citation demonstrates a pattern of harassment. When we get in front of a judge, this is going to be very clear-cut." The court date was set for March 28th. David filed all the necessary paperwork, and we received confirmation that the HOA had been properly served. I expected them to hire their own attorney, but according to the court records, Patricia was planning to represent the HOA herself. "That is a mistake on her part," David said. "But it works in our favor." As the court date approached, I started hearing from neighbors. Apparently, word had spread about my dispute with the HOA. Several people stopped me while I was getting my mail or walking Murphy to share their own horror stories about Patricia and the HOA board. My next-door neighbor, an elderly woman named Margaret, told me about the time Patricia fined her for having the wrong shade of white paint on her shutters. The HOA-approved color was Swiss coffee, but Margaret's painter had used antique white. Patricia made her repaint the entire house. Another neighbor, a young couple named Tom and Sarah, described how Patricia had tried to fine them for parking their car on the street overnight. The covenant said nothing about street parking, but Patricia claimed it was an implied rule based on community standards. Everyone had a story, and everyone was too afraid to fight back. Patricia had been HOA president for 6 years, running unopposed in every election. People had learned it was easier to just comply with her demands than to challenge her. "You are doing what the rest of us have been too scared to do," Tom told me one evening. "Please do not back down. Someone needs to put her in her place." The support from my neighbors was encouraging, but it also made me realize how toxic the situation had become. Patricia had created an environment where people were afraid to enjoy their own homes because they never knew what arbitrary rule she might enforce next. The night before the court date, I could barely sleep. I kept reviewing the evidence in my mind, making sure I had not missed anything. David had assured me we had a strong case, but I still felt nervous. I had never been to small claims court before, and I had no idea what to expect. The Boulder County Justice Center was a modern building near downtown. I arrived early and met David in the lobby. He was younger than I expected, probably in his mid-30s, with an easy confidence that immediately put me at ease. "Ready for this?" he asked, shaking my hand. "As ready as I will ever be." We made our way to the small claims courtroom on the second floor. It was smaller than I expected, with simple wooden benches and a judge's bench at the front. Patricia was already there, sitting alone at the defendant's table. She glared at me as I entered, her expression full of contempt. The judge, an older man named Judge Robert Morrison, entered promptly at 9 o'clock. Everyone stood, and then he invited us to sit. "Case number 26-4578, he read from his papers. "Zachary Langford versus Meadowbrook Estates Homeowners Association. Mr. Langford is requesting removal of a property lien, withdrawal of fines, and recovery of legal fees. Is the plaintiff ready?" David stood. "Yes, Your Honor." David Chen representing the plaintiff. "And the defense?" Patricia stood, smoothing her skirt. "Patricia Garrison, president of the Meadowbrook Estates HOA. I am representing the association." Judge Morrison nodded. "Mr. Chen, you may present your case." David began by explaining the basic facts, walking the judge through the timeline from the initial citation to the placement of the lien. He submitted the survey maps, photographs, and copies of all correspondence into evidence. He also provided copies of the relevant HOA covenants, with the sections about property boundaries and common areas highlighted. "Your Honor," David said, "the evidence is unambiguous. The area in question, where the alleged violation occurred, is not within Mr. Langford's property boundaries. According to the HOA's own covenants, common areas are the responsibility of the HOA, not individual homeowners." Despite being provided with clear documentation of this fact, the HOA not only refused to withdraw the fine but actually increased it and placed a lien on Mr. Langford's property. Judge Morrison examined the survey maps carefully, comparing them to the photographs. "These survey stakes are clearly marked in the photos. Miss Garrison, do you dispute the location of these property boundaries?" Patricia stood again, clutching a folder of her own papers. "Your Honor, while the technical property line may be where Mr. Langford claims, the spirit of the HOA covenants requires all homeowners to maintain their properties and the areas immediately adjacent to them. The yellow snow was near his fence line. It was unsightly and reflected poorly on the entire community. The spirit of the covenants," Judge Morrison raised an eyebrow. "Miss Garrison, legal documents are interpreted based on what they actually say, not on spirit or implied meanings. Does the covenant document explicitly state that homeowners are responsible for areas outside their property lines?" Patricia's face flushed. "Not explicitly, but the board has the authority to interpret the covenants and enforce community standards. Do you have any documentation showing that this interpretation has been consistently applied? Have other homeowners been cited for conditions in common areas outside their property lines?" Patricia hesitated. "I would need to review past citations to answer that specifically." Judge Morrison looked unimpressed. "So you are saying you may have singled out Mr. Langford with an interpretation of the covenants that you have not applied consistently to other residents?" "No, that is not what I am saying." "Then what are you saying?" Patricia fumbled with her papers, clearly flustered. "I am saying that Mr. Langford has been difficult and uncooperative since the beginning. He refused to simply clean up the yellow snow when asked. A reasonable homeowner would have just taken care of it instead of creating all this conflict." David stood immediately. "Your Honor, may I respond?" "Please do." "Miss Garrison's statement reveals the real issue here. This is not about property maintenance or community standards. This is about a homeowner who dared to question an HOA president's authority. Mr. Langford did nothing wrong. He simply pointed out that he was being asked to maintain property that was not his responsibility. Instead of acknowledging the error, the HOA doubled the fine and placed a lien on his property. This is textbook harassment. Judge Morrison nodded slowly. I am inclined to agree. Miss Garrison, did you review the survey documentation that Mr. Langford provided before increasing the fine? I looked at it, yes. And did you consult with an attorney or surveyor to verify whether his interpretation was correct? Patricia's silence was answer enough. Judge Morrison leaned back in his chair. Miss Garrison, I am going to be very direct with you. This case should never have reached my courtroom. You issued a citation for a violation that occurred outside the plaintiff's property boundaries. When he provided documentation proving this, you not only refused to acknowledge your error but escalated the situation. This suggests either incompetence or malice, and I am not sure which is worse. Patricia's face had gone from red to pale. Your Honor, I was acting in what I believed were the best interests of the community. The best interests of the community are served by following the law and the HOA's own governing documents. He looked down at the papers in front of him. I am ruling in favor of the plaintiff on all counts. The lien is to be removed immediately. All fines are withdrawn. The HOA will pay Mr. Langford's legal fees in the amount of $1,500. Additionally, I am ordering the HOA to pay Mr. Langford $1,000 in damages for harassment and the costs associated with this legal action. Patricia looked like she might faint. Your Honor, the HOA cannot afford that. We operate on a limited budget. Then perhaps you should have considered that before placing an illegal lien on someone's property. Judge Morrison signed several documents and handed them to the clerk. The HOA has 30 days to make full payment to Mr. Langford. If payment is not received within that time frame, Mr. Langford may take additional legal action to collect. This case is closed. I sat there for a moment, barely believing what had just happened. David was grinning beside me, packing up his briefcase. Patricia remained at the defendant's table, staring down at her papers with an expression of shocked disbelief. Outside the courtroom, David shook my hand enthusiastically. That went even better than I expected. Judge Morrison does not tolerate HOA overreach, and Patricia made it easy for him by admitting she was essentially targeting you. What happens now? I asked. The court order will be officially filed today. The HOA has 30 days to pay you the full amount, $2,500 total. If they do not pay, we can pursue collection, but I doubt it will come to that. They cannot afford to ignore a court order. What about Patricia? Will she face any consequences? David shrugged. That depends on the HOA board. They might decide to remove her as president, or they might rally around her. Either way, she's going to think twice before harassing you again. I thanked David for his help and drove home feeling lighter than I had in weeks. The weight of the situation had been pressing down on me, making it hard to enjoy my house or my life. Now, finally, it was over, or so I thought. 2 days after the court hearing, I found a note taped to my front door. It was handwritten in angry, jagged letters that were barely legible. The note said that I had betrayed the community, that I was a troublemaker who did not deserve to live in Meadowbrook Estates, and that karma would catch up with me eventually. It was unsigned, but I had no doubt who had written it. I took a photo of the note and sent it to David. He responded immediately, telling me to file a police report. The note could be considered harassment or even a threat, and there needed to be official documentation. I drove to the Boulder Police Department and filed a report with an officer named Detective Lisa Ramirez. She read the note carefully and asked me to explain the context. I gave her the full story, from the yellow snow citation to the court ruling. "So you think the HOA president wrote this?" she asked. "I cannot prove it, but yes, she is the only person who would have a reason to be this angry at me." Detective Ramirez made copies of the note and my photograph. "I will follow up on this. In the meantime, if you receive any more notes or if anyone threatens you directly, call us immediately. Do you have security cameras on your property?" "No, I do not." "You might want to consider installing some. Given the situation, it would be good to have video documentation if anything else happens." I took her advice and ordered a home security system that afternoon. The cameras would cover my front door, driveway, and backyard, recording continuously and sending alerts to my phone if they detected motion. The cameras arrived 3 days later, and I spent a Saturday afternoon installing them. The process was surprisingly straightforward, and by evening I had a fully functional security system. I tested it by walking around the house, watching my phone light up with motion alerts and video clips. That night, around 2 in the morning, my phone buzzed with an alert. I grabbed it from my nightstand, still half asleep, and pulled up the camera app. The front door camera showed a figure standing in my driveway, illuminated by the motion-activated lights. I recognized Patricia immediately, even though she was wearing a dark coat and had her hair pulled back. She was holding something in her hand, and as I watched, she walked up to my front door and sprayed something on it. Then she turned and hurried back to her car, which was parked on the street with its lights off. I jumped out of bed and ran to the front door, throwing it open. Patricia was already in her car, driving away. I looked down at my door and saw that she had spray painted the word snitch in large red letters across the white surface. My hands were shaking as I pulled up the video and saved it to my phone. Then I called the police. Within 15 minutes, 2 officers arrived. I showed them the video and the vandalism. They took photos and asked me detailed questions about my ongoing dispute with Patricia. "We will go talk to her tonight," one of the officers said. "This is clearly vandalism, and we have video evidence. She will likely be charged and arrested. Will I need to press charges? We will handle the criminal side. You might want to pursue civil damages for the door repair, but that is separate." The officers left, and I spent the next hour trying to clean the spray paint off my door. It was oil-based and stubbornly resistant to my efforts. Eventually, I gave up and went back to bed, knowing I would need to have the door professionally cleaned or repainted. The next morning, I received a call from Detective Ramirez. "Mr. Langford, I wanted to update you on last night's incident. Officers went to Patricia Garrison's home around 3 in the morning. She initially denied being at your property, but when confronted with the video evidence, she admitted to spray painting your door. She was arrested and charged with criminal mischief and harassment. She posted bail this morning and has been released pending trial. What happens next? She will be arraigned within a few days. The district attorney will handle the prosecution. You might be called as a witness, but the video evidence is pretty damning. I expect she will be offered a plea deal. Thank you for keeping me informed." "Of course. And Mr. Langford, I strongly recommend you file for a restraining order." Given her pattern of behavior, I think a judge would grant it. I called David Chen and told him about the vandalism and arrest. He was shocked but not entirely surprised. "Patricia really went off the deep end," he said. "Filing for a restraining order is a good idea. I can help you with that. We should also send a letter to the HOA board informing them of Patricia's arrest and demanding her immediate removal as president." They have a responsibility to the community to remove someone who is engaging in criminal behavior. David filed the restraining order paperwork that afternoon. The hearing was scheduled for the following week. In the meantime, I had to get my front door repainted. The estimate was $400, which I planned to add to my civil claim against Patricia. News of Patricia's arrest spread through Meadowbrook Estates like wildfire. Within 2 days, everyone knew what had happened. Some neighbors stopped by to express their support and share their relief that Patricia was finally facing consequences. Others seemed uncomfortable, as if they were not sure whether to side with me or with the HOA. Margaret, my elderly neighbor, brought me homemade cookies and gave me a long hug. "I am so proud of you for standing up to her," she said. "She has made so many people miserable over the years. Maybe now we can have a normal neighborhood again." Tom and Sarah invited me over for dinner and told me they were planning to run for the HOA board in the next election. "We need to completely overhaul how this association operates," Tom said. "Patricia turned it into her personal fiefdom. That needs to end." The restraining order hearing took place on a Tuesday morning. Patricia appeared with a lawyer this time, a harried-looking man who seemed like he wished he was anywhere else. The hearing was brief. David presented the evidence of Patricia's harassment, including the citations, the court case, the threatening note, and the vandalism video. Patricia's lawyer tried to argue that she was under extreme stress and not thinking clearly, but Judge Karen Phillips was unsympathetic. "Miss Garrison has engaged in a sustained pattern of harassment against Mr. Langford," Judge Phillips said. "The vandalism was particularly egregious. I am granting a temporary restraining order for 1 year. Miss Garrison is to have no contact with Mr. Langford, direct or indirect. She is not to come within 100 yards of his property. Violation of this order will result in immediate arrest." Patricia stared at the judge with barely contained fury, but said nothing. Her lawyer quickly ushered her out of the courtroom. 3 days later, I received an email from Summit Property Solutions. The email informed me that Patricia Garrison had resigned as HOA president, effective immediately. The board had appointed an interim president, a man named Roger Hamilton, who lived on the other side of the subdivision. Roger had included a personal note at the bottom of the email, apologizing for the situation and promising that the HOA would operate more transparently and fairly going forward. The HOA's payment arrived a week later, a check for $2,500 as ordered by the court. I deposited it immediately, finally closing that chapter of the ordeal. Patricia's criminal case took several months to resolve. As Detective Ramirez had predicted, she was offered a plea deal. She pleaded guilty to criminal mischief and harassment, receiving a suspended jail sentence, 2 years of probation, and an order to pay restitution for my door repair and other costs. She was also required to complete anger management counseling. In the months that followed, life in Meadowbrook Estates gradually returned to normal. Roger Hamilton proved to be a reasonable and competent HOA president. He worked with the board to clarify the covenants, removing ambiguous language that had allowed Patricia to abuse her authority. They also implemented new policies requiring board approval before any fines could be issued, preventing future presidents from acting unilaterally. Tom and Sarah won seats on the HOA board in the next election, bringing fresh perspectives and a commitment to making the neighborhood more welcoming. They even organized community events like summer barbecues and holiday parties, things that had never happened under Patricia's reign. I saw Patricia occasionally around Boulder, usually at the grocery store or gas station. She always looked away when she saw me, refusing to make eye contact. I felt no satisfaction in her downfall, only relief that the harassment had ended. She had created her own problems by refusing to admit a simple mistake and instead choosing to escalate a trivial issue into a legal nightmare. The yellow snow incident became something of a legend in Meadowbrook Estates. New residents would hear the story and laugh in disbelief. It became shorthand for HOA overreach, a cautionary tale about what happens when small amounts of power go to someone's head. One evening in late September, about 7 months after the court case, I was sitting on my back porch watching the sunset over the foothills. Murphy was stretched out beside me, contentedly chewing a bone. The air was crisp with the first hints of autumn, and the aspen trees on the mountains were turning gold. Margaret walked over from her yard, moving slowly with her cane. I got up and helped her into one of my porch chairs. "Beautiful evening," she said, settling in with a satisfied sigh. "It really is," I agreed. "You know, Zachary, I was thinking about everything that happened with Patricia. It was awful at the time, but I think it might have been the best thing that could have happened to this neighborhood." "How do you figure that?" "Well, before you stood up to her, everyone was just accepting her behavior as normal. We all complained to each other, but nobody did anything about it. You showed us that we did not have to live that way. Now we have a real community, not just a bunch of scared homeowners trying to avoid the HOA president's wrath." I thought about that for a moment. She was right. The neighborhood did feel different now. People were friendlier, more relaxed. There was a sense of actual community rather than enforced compliance. "I am just glad it is over," I said. Margaret smiled. "Me too. And for what it is worth, I am glad you moved here, even if you did bring all that drama with you," I laughed. "I did not bring the drama. The drama found me." "Fair enough." She pushed herself up from the chair, gripping her cane. "I should get back before it gets too dark, but thank you, Zachary, for everything." After she left, I sat on the porch for another hour, watching the stars come out. Murphy had fallen asleep, his head resting on my foot. The house was peaceful. The neighborhood was peaceful. And for the first time since I had moved to Colorado, everything felt exactly right. The irony of the entire situation never escaped me. Patricia had tried to find me over yellow snow, something completely beyond anyone's control, on property that was not even mine to maintain. Her refusal to acknowledge a simple error had cost her position, her reputation, and even resulted in a criminal record. All because she could not admit she was wrong about something as trivial as animal urine in the snow. I learned a lot from the experience. I learned that documentation is everything when dealing with bureaucratic disputes. I learned that standing up for yourself, even when it is expensive and stressful, is sometimes necessary. Most importantly, I learned that HOAs are only as good as the people who run them, and that communities thrive when leadership is reasonable, fair, and willing to admit mistakes. The legal bills had been worth it, not just for my own peace of mind, but for the positive changes they sparked in the neighborhood. Other residents felt empowered to speak up about concerns and suggestions. Board meetings became actual discussions, rather than Patricia delivering edicts. The HOA even started a community newsletter with updates on maintenance projects and upcoming events. As I finally headed inside that night, I took one last look at my property. The fence line where the yellow snow had appeared was barely visible in the darkness. By now, any traces of that snow were long gone, melted away with the changing seasons. But the impact of that moment, when I decided to stand my ground rather than pay an unjust fine, would last far longer. Sometimes the smallest battles teach the biggest lessons. Patricia learned that authority without accountability leads to downfall. The neighborhood learned that collective action can overcome individual tyranny. And I learned that home is not just about the physical property you own, but about being part of a community where you are treated with respect and fairness. Life in Meadowbrook Estates continued peacefully after that. The HOA functioned as it should, maintaining common areas and handling necessary business without harassing residents over imaginary violations. Patricia moved away about a year later, selling her house and relocating to Denver. I heard through the neighborhood grapevine that she had learned her lesson and was keeping a much lower profile in her new community. Roger Hamilton served as HOA president for 2 years before stepping down to focus on his business. Tom took over after that, bringing enthusiasm and common sense to the role. The neighborhood flourished under his leadership, with property values increasing and new families moving in. As for me, I settled into my home and my life in Colorado with deep satisfaction. I made good friends among my neighbors, found hiking trails I loved in the foothills, and Murphy became something of a neighborhood mascot, beloved by everyone who met him. The house that I had bought on a whim, fleeing the crowds and traffic of California, became exactly what I had hoped for, a peaceful refuge where I could build a life. The spray-painted door was long since repaired and repainted, the legal documents filed away in a folder I rarely opened. The memories of those stressful months faded into anecdotes I would occasionally share at parties or neighborhood gatherings, always with a sense of disbelief that it had actually happened. But every winter, when the first snow fell and I looked out at my property, I thought about that morning when Patricia had stood in my driveway, clipboard in hand, ready to fine me for yellow snow. I thought about how a single decision to stand up for myself had changed everything. And I smiled, grateful for the lesson and for the community that had emerged from the chaos. The yellow snow was never just about yellow snow. It was about power, control, and what happens when ordinary people decide they have had enough of being pushed around. It was about the importance of knowing your rights, documenting everything, and being willing to fight when fighting is necessary. In the end, Patricia Garrison tried to fine me for yellow snow on property that was not even mine. She got laughed out of court, arrested for vandalism, and ultimately lost everything she had worked to build over 6 years as HOA president. It was a harsh lesson, but sometimes harsh lessons are the only ones that stick. As for Meadowbrook Estates, the neighborhood thrived precisely because one person had the courage to say no to unjust authority. Every resident benefited from that stand, even if they did not realize it at the time. The HOA became what it should have been all along, an organization dedicated to maintaining property and building community, not a tool for one person's power trips. I still live in my house on Meadow Lane. Murphy is older now, moving a bit slower but still greeting every visitor with enthusiasm. The mountains are still beautiful, the neighbors are still friendly, and the HOA is still reasonable. Every morning when I step out onto my porch with my coffee, I appreciate how good it feels to live somewhere I am treated with respect. And if I occasionally see patches of yellow snow near the fence line, evidence of deer or coyotes passing through in the night, I just smile and go about my day. Because now everyone knows, thanks to a court ruling and a rather dramatic series of events, that yellow snow in common areas is not my problem to solve. The story of the yellow snow fine became part of local HOA lore, spreading beyond Meadowbrook Estates to other neighborhoods in Boulder. I heard from friends in other subdivisions that their HOA presidents had become noticeably more careful about issuing citations, afraid of becoming the next Patricia Garrison. That ripple effect made me proud. One person standing up had created positive change in multiple communities. David Chen and I stayed in touch. He occasionally referred other homeowners to me when they were dealing with HOA disputes, knowing I would give them honest advice about whether fighting was worth it. I always told them the same thing: document everything, know your rights, and do not be afraid to stand up for yourself. The legal system worked the way it was supposed to in my case. The judge saw through the nonsense, recognized harassment when he saw it, and ruled accordingly. The criminal justice system held Patricia accountable for vandalism. The restraining order kept me safe. It all functioned as intended, which gave me renewed faith in institutions I had sometimes doubted. But none of it would have happened if I had simply paid that first $250 fine. It would have been easier in the short term to just comply, to shovel away the yellow snow and move on with my life. Instead, I chose the harder path, and that choice made all the difference. Now, several years later, I can look back on the entire ordeal with a sense of accomplishment rather than bitterness. Yes, it was stressful and expensive and time-consuming. Yes, there were moments when I wondered if I was making a huge mistake. But ultimately, standing up for myself was the right choice, both for me personally and for the community as a whole. The house on Meadow Lane is more than just my home now. It is a symbol of something larger, the idea that ordinary people can challenge unjust authority and win. That even when the bureaucracy seems overwhelming and the other side holds all the power, the truth still matters. That documentation and persistence and a little bit of courage can overcome bullying and overreach. Patricia learned that lesson the hard way. I learned it too, though from the opposite perspective. And the residents of Meadowbrook Estates learned that their HOA could be something positive rather than something to fear. All because of yellow snow. All because I refused to pay a fine for something that was not my fault and not my responsibility. All because when Patricia Garrison tried to laugh me out of the neighborhood, I ended up laughing last when a judge ruled in my favor and justice was served. The yellow snow melted away with the spring thaw, but the lessons remained. The community rebuilt itself into something better, and I found a home where I truly belonged, surrounded by neighbors who respected each other and an HOA that actually served the community rather than ruling over it. That is the real ending to the story. Not the court victory or Patricia's arrest, but the quiet contentment of living in a place where you are treated fairly and where standing up for what is right is valued and supported. It is the ending I had hoped for when I first moved to Colorado, and it is the ending I got, though the path to get there was far more dramatic than I ever could have anticipated. Every time I walk Murphy through the neighborhood now, I see the results of that fight. Children playing in yards without their parents worrying about HOA citations. Holiday decorations that might not be exactly regulation, but bring joy to the community. Cars parked on the street when garages are full. Little acts of normal life that should never have required permission or generated fines. That is what I fought for, even if I did not fully realize it at the time. I fought for the right to live normally, to not be harassed over things that did not matter, to have my property boundaries respected, and to be treated like an adult rather than a subject. And I won. Patricia Garrison tried to fine me for yellow snow that was not on my property. She got laughed out of court when I proved my case with surveys and photographs and clear documentation. She lost her position, her reputation, and her freedom when she crossed the line from harassment to criminal behavior. And in losing, she inadvertently gave Meadowbrook Estates the chance to become what it should have been all along. That is the story of the yellow snow. It is ridiculous and absurd and completely true. It is a story about HOA overreach, about standing up to bullies, and about how even the smallest injustice deserves to be challenged. It is a story I will probably tell for the rest of my life, always with a mixture of disbelief and satisfaction. And it all started on a cold February morning when a woman with a clipboard and too much power decided that yellow snow in a common area was my responsibility to fix. She was wrong, and I proved it. That is all that really matters in the end.